Hi triathletes, welcome back to another session with TriathlontesSA. As the lovely rain is falling outside, today I'll be discussing with you guys how you can do lactic threshold testing for running, as well as how you can incorporate that into your training to train as efficient as possible and see that improvement that you really want in your training. If you like the content of this video, please go and like and subscribe to this channel down there, and also hit the bell notification to be notified when new videos are released. What is lactic threshold? Lactic threshold is the pace that you can sustain over a period of 60 minutes. Now most people will say just take 220 less your age, but that is not an accurate way of calculating that. The most accurate way to do that would be to do a lab testing where you test your VO2 max, but that will cost you a little bit of money and most people would not be able to do that. So for today's purposes, we'll be looking at the 30-minute or 5-kilometer time trial to measure your lactic threshold and use that to determine your training zones. Now before we do the test, there's a couple of things that you should first take into account before doing the test. First off, when you do the test, you should be rested. So I would suggest that 2 days before the test, you would back down on your training to give your body time to rest so you'll be fresh when you do the threshold test. And then secondly, a heart rate strap would be much better than using a wrist-based HR, but it will also be fine if you do not have a heart rate monitor. Then lastly, when you do your lactic threshold test, I would suggest that you pick a route that's flat and does not have many stops, as this will also influence the test results at the end. And then another thing, you should do this test by yourself, as when you're in a race or doing it with a partner, you tend to push a bit harder, so those results would not be accurate as well. So make sure that you do the test alone, and then also that is on a flat route with no hills or stops to keep you from maintaining a certain pace. Now when you do the test, usually the test is done at an effort level of 7 or 8 or 9 out of 10. So it's not flat out, and I would also suggest that you try and keep the same pace over this distance, and it does not differ with more than 10%. Otherwise, these results would also not be accurate. Now what can influence these tests? There's a couple of things that can influence these tests as well. Heat, if it's warm outside, so the time of day when you do your lactic threshold test. Dehydration would also have an influence, as well as altitude. And then lastly, something that most people forget about, caffeine would also influence your heart rate. So make sure that you do the test at exactly the same time, as well as if you have a cup of coffee an hour before, make sure that you have a cup of coffee an hour before every time when you do the test. And then something that can lower your heart rate is if you're a little bit fatigued, then your heart rate would also drop a couple of beats if you're very fatigued when doing this test. And then another question you might ask is, why do we do lactic threshold testing? We want to see if we improve in our running. Now the best way to do that is doing a standardized test, and that is why we do the lactic threshold test, to determine if we have improved from our training. We also use the lactic threshold test to determine our training zones, to make sure that our training is dialed in at exactly the pace that's needed to see some improvement. Okay, so now you're ready to take the test. For the test, you'll only need your wrist watch as well as your wrist-based heart rate or a heart rate strap to perform this, and then a route that's flat and without any stops. Just remember, it needs to be 30 minutes or 5 kilometer, and you need to do the test the same every time. So if you stick to the 30 minutes, you need to do a 30-minute test every 4 to 6 weeks, or if you take the 5K, you need to do a 5K test every 4 to 6 weeks. Now when you start your test, say for instance you took the 30 minutes test, the first 10 minutes your HR would still be climbing before it's stabilized. So what they usually suggest is you need to push the lap button after 10 minutes and only take the heart rate for the last 20 minutes of your HR test. That does not mean that you can slack off the first 10 minutes of the test. You need to maintain the same average pace with less than 10% difference from the start of the test. So the first 10 minutes would only help your heart rate to stabilize, but you still need to go at the same pace. And then when you have done the test, we'll only use the last 20 minutes of the test for the HR data as well as your pacing. So after 10 minutes, just push the lap button on your watch, and then when you're done, just push the stop button. Now once you've done the test, we'll use the data to explain how you can use that within your training sessions. Now remember, I said we should refrain from training in zone 3 as there is no adaptation if you run in zone 3. The same goes for doing the same training over and over and over every day. You would maybe build some distance, but you would not see some improvement in your running. So for that, we need to run at very low paces, zone 1 and 2, and we also need to run at very high paces, which would be zone 4 and 5. Most of our tempo runs would be done in zone 4, which is the lactic threshold zone, and that will also see us improve that lactic threshold zone. So we'll go at faster paces at the exact same heart rate as we improve in our running. Now after you've done your lactic threshold test, you'll have two numbers. The one would be your average pace that you sustained over the 30 minutes or the 5 kilometer, whichever one you choose. And the other one would be your average heart rate sustained over the last 20 minutes of your run. Remember, the first 10 minutes was only for your heart rate to stabilize. We're not going to use that HR data. Now there's two different ways that you can use these numbers. The first one would be your heart rate zones. I suggest you use the heart rate zones when you do your endurance running or your long runs or your recovery runs or even your warm-ups and cool down. So that will be zone 1 and 2. And remember, we should not train in zone 3. And if you can't remember the training zones anymore, you can go back to one of my previous videos where I explained the training zones with heart rate and power. That will help you to determine which heart rates would be run in zone 1 and 2. But when we do our interval sets, I would rather use the pacing instead of the heart rate, as both of these zones have a place in our training. So if you look at the intervals would be as follows. If you look at the pacing zones, zone 1 would be more than 129% of that average pace that you did in your test. Zone 2 would be somewhere between 114% and 128%. But these two we'll use for heart rate, so it's not that important. Zone 3 would be between 106 and 113%. Once again, we'll only use this for races and not really for training. So I would also refrain from training in zone 3. The two that you guys can use for intervals would be zone 4, which would be between 105 and 99% of your average pace that you did in the 5 kilometer or 30-minute test. And then lastly, zone 5 would be less than 99% of your average pace. Once you've determined your running paces for zone 4 and 5, you can use that for doing your interval sets, as it would be more accurate than using your heart rate. And then also remember, when doing your training sessions, your heart rate will also differ when there's heat, dehydration, caffeine, or altitude involved. So remember, when you train, that would also influence your training. And then lastly, when you do hill training, I would also refer back to heart rate instead of training paces, as your heart rate would be a much more accurate figure looking at rather than your pace when doing hill repeats. The following 5 videos will be a bit different than the previous ones, as I'll have interviews with specialists in certain areas of triathlon. So the first video will be an interview with a swimming specialist, the second one with a biking specialist, and then a running specialist, and then the fourth one will be with strength and mobility, and the last one will be an interview with someone with nutrition and recovery. So stay tuned for that as well. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this content, please go and subscribe to my YouTube channel and join my Facebook group and Instagram, all on TriathlontesSA. Also go and check out the website at www.triathlontesSA.com. Remember, I'll also post daily exercises on Instagram as well as on Facebook that you can do in the comfort of your own home. So if you want to check out a video about training zones, go and check out up here. Also subscribe to my channel up here. And then lastly, remember to stay motivated during this COVID-19 crisis and take it one day at a time. And then keep up your training, and I'll see you guys soon.